Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Actual Conversations. Today I have Carly Matthews, a representative from the American Conservation Coalition. It's a conservative group that deals with environmental issues. Carly, how are you?
Doing well. Thank you for having me.
Well, the honor's all mine. So let's dive right into this. Tell me about your organization and the origin story.
Absolutely. So our organization was founded by Benji Backer in 2017 to fill kind of this market gap in the environmental conversation and re-engage people with limited government market-based ideals in environmentalism and addressing things like climate change or the problems we're seeing with our national parks and public lands, conservation issues. So we want people to know that environmental and economic success are not mutually exclusive. So we're really aiming at engaging young people on these issues, regardless of their political affiliation. We want them to see that our solutions work, our principles work, at reducing emissions, at protecting our environment, and creating bipartisan solutions.
That's awesome. And what's interesting is that what you described there, I guess for, I don't know how old you are, but when I was growing up, it was kind of the notion that the left was kind of viewed, like the political left was viewed as the people who cared about the environment, and the right was viewed as, oh, well, they're just about industry and pollution and these kinds of things. And you're actually making the case that, no, this is the opposite.
I think that I'm only 22, so for my lifetime, the conversation really has been dominated by the left side of the political aisle. This is really an opportunity for us to work together. All different political stripes can work together on limited government, market-based ideals that are going to actionably reduce carbon emissions. This isn't just rhetoric. These aren't just principles we're throwing up in the air. We're talking about real solutions that will reduce emissions and protect our environment.
Awesome. What specific policies? You mentioned market-based solutions. Could you dive into that a little bit? What are your specific policies, goals, and perhaps agendas that you're looking to achieve?
Absolutely. So the government does have a place, obviously, in protecting our environment. There has to be some sort of government standard that is kind of setting the stage for climate and environmental action. We really believe in the power of private-public partnerships to develop technologies like carbon capture technology, to further develop nuclear technology so that it's safer, more abundant, more marketable, and inexpensive. We're talking about things like battery storage, which make renewable energy more marketable, because solar power is great, but if you have a cloudy day, you still need energy. So if we can store power when it's really, really sunny, and then we'll have kind of an abundance for later when it's cloud.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I guess one of my questions for you guys is it that you agree with the sentiment of the left that global warming is a real thing, climate change is a real thing, humans are contributing to it, but we just don't believe in the same solution, whereas the left would suggest that we let government kind of just take over economics in general and the economy in general. Whereas you guys say, no, privatization and capitalism essentially are the solutions for the problems that we see. Where I kind of come from an old school of thinking that this climate change agenda was really in so many words, a political hoax in so many ways. But what is your position on that?
So ACC's position is that climate change is real. Humans and the Industrial Revolution absolutely have contributed to a rise in carbon emissions. And right, that our solutions are just different. So I don't believe that the government needs to take over and kind of dictate how we address environmental issues. Instead, we want to pursue economic prosperity and environmental success at the same time. So clean energy industry, for instance, by the end of 2018, employed almost 3.3 million Americans. That's an industry that we can develop that's good for our economy and for our environment. So it's not this mutually exclusive choice that maybe was kind of purported in the past. And we really want to build bridges and come up with solutions that are true to our principles, our limited government, market-based principles, but will create a cleaner, healthier planet for generations to come.
Yeah, it's great. That's all great stuff. I remember I'm 31 now, so I'm a little older than you, but I remember about 5 years ago, it did dawn on me that it almost didn't matter what you believed about global warming, whether you thought it was a hoax or you believed it was the realest thing in the world. What mattered was the solutions and how are we going to get past this. And I think you're right. I think what it comes down to is if you don't like the carbon fuels that we're using, the only way to get off of that is to create a new source of energy that's even better. And historically, that's always been the case. When we've upgraded from horse and buggies to cars, it wasn't because there were government mandates. It was because of industry and because of the pursuit of profits and the innovations and technologies and all these things. So, and it almost, like I said, I don't think it even matters whether you believe it. It's just a matter of the solutions and how we're going to get there in a viable manner. That's why I'm so interested by you guys, because it seems like you're kind of that actual middle ground where it's like, you know what? Let's not even have the discussion about who's right or wrong. Right or wrong. Let's just have the solutions. Let's put on the lab coats instead of going and protesting and just kind of screaming about stuff and doing all the weird stuff the left does.
Yeah, the late Senator John McCain has just a really great quote about this, and its sentiment is, what's the worst thing that's going to happen if we pursue greener technology? We're going to have a cleaner planet for our children and grandchildren. So as long as we do so in a way that is economically feasible, that takes markets into account, we're doing something that's good for our economy and our environment. And that's really important to ACC.
Absolutely. Have you guys had any significant successes in your pursuits?
Absolutely. So in April of this year, we launched the American Climate Contract, which is our market-based platform, climate change action, and we did a call to action regarding the principles of the contract about 2 weeks ago, and sent more than 500 emails to members of Congress. Earlier in fall of 2019, our president, Benji Backer, testified in front of a joint session of Congress. He was kind of the sole participant who believes in limited government and market-based solutions for climate change, and he was praised by both sides of the aisle of really being a leader on these issues. Also this year, our organization has been featured on The Today Show and CNN as kind of a leader on environmental issues.
Oh, wow. Awesome. So you guys are really, you're in the trenches, you're trying to get legislation passed, and it seems like you're doing good work. That's awesome. What are your kind of like long-term goals? Like what's, obviously if you get your stuff, if you get your ideas passed into laws, what kind of are you looking beyond that? Are you looking to kind of become more of like a bigger player in the political scene in general?
Absolutely. So the American Conservation Coalition absolutely advocates for legislation and endorses candidates and has, some political power. We also have a sister organization called the American Conservation Coalition Campus, and that's specifically an educational program for high school and college students who want to get involved in the issues and kind of need the tools to talk about limited government, market-based environmentalism. So we have student leaders on 200 campuses nationwide, and they're really bringing this message to their fellow students and their campuses. And that's really, really important because a lot of times students who are politically active in the conservative space might be interested in the environment, but they aren't exactly sure how to talk about it while staying true to their principles because it's an issue that has been so dominated by kind of this bigger government agenda. So that's been really successful in activating students, and not just conservative students. These are actionable solutions that work to reduce carbon emissions. So you don't have to be a conservative to buy into our ideas. We have independents and libertarians and just a wide array of people who believe in pursuing an economically feasible agenda for climate change and the environment.
Awesome. And I think what would be useful here is because you talk about how you want to have a broader outreach to people. And so kind of one thing I wanted to go over with you is kind of the history of this issue politically and scientifically speaking. Because like I said, I kind of come from a school of thought where, back in the day when we had kind of Roy Spencer and Dr. John Christie and guys like Tony Heller out there kind of kind of questioning the science, and there was a lot of kind of shady political stuff going on. I mean, there were climatologists who were getting fired for not kind of agreeing with the established state position. There was even at the IPCC, back in the early 2000s, when they were doing these reports and they were creating these climate models. It was just really frowned upon to even question these things and to analyze, oh, well, how do these models work? Like, what's the process? What's their accuracy? How does the results in the models compare to other theories like sunspot theory and these kinds of things? What would you say to people who kind of grew up with that alternative history, where they kind of, by their estimations, they saw a lot of politics corrupting science and a lot of, I would say, unscientific things happening in a world that's supposed to be, I would say, objective and scientific, that being the climate research field?
Right. There's no doubt that the environmental conversation has absolutely been politicized. There was a time when kind of politicians and people of all political stripes kind of agreed that environmental issues should be prioritized, and then kind of had this shift of politics getting in the way. And I think what I would say to people who kind of have that frame in the back of their mind is it's time to move forward, and it's time to pursue solutions that aren't necessarily big government, but to understand that we have to protect our planet. And it's really important that we work together and we build bridges. And I think kind of pointing fingers and saying, well, this side politicized it, or this side engaged in climate denial, or whatever people are saying, that's really counterproductive when we could be pursuing solutions that create jobs for Americans, that reduce emissions, that clean up our oceans, that protect our national parks. We could be doing that instead of kind of being stuck on the history of the issue. I think it's really just time to move forward, to change the narrative on the issue kind of as an entirety.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. And what would you say to kind of the other side? So I can think of a couple friends of mine personally who they're not big fans of capitalism. So they're kind of on the opposite end, whereas my side, they could kind of discuss, and I love that, just kind of, we got to move forward. I love that message entirely, that regardless of what's happened in the past, I mean, these are all things that we actually agree on right now, and that being kind of free market capitalism. But looking at the other side, where people will say, oh, well, we agree in these solutions, but we don't agree that, markets and capitalism and, those things are the right way to do it. What would you say to those people?
I would say that it's really a myth that socialism is good for the environment. Countries that have experimented with socialism have not had environmental success, and that system has not yielded the innovation and the development of technologies that we really need to pursue in order to reduce emissions. I would say that capitalism has absolutely helped the United States address climate change, whether that's through consumer demands. Americans are voting with their dollars, and they're saying, I'm going to support this company because they produce their products sustainably, and that's important to me. So more companies are noticing that, and to be competitive in the market, they have to comply with consumer demands. We also see capitalism getting people to harness the power of American ingenuity and innovate and come up with technologies like carbon capture. I mean, 50 years ago, who would have thought that technology would be in the works that can really filter carbon out of the air like a tree does? And that's technology that we are working on deploying. So I would say that idea that capitalism is kind of this evil force that is just pumping out emissions and letting businesses ruin our planet, that's just this narrative that's not true. Capitalism gives a lot of power to the consumer, and we believe that through consumer demands, through innovation, through private and public partnerships, we can really address climate change in a way that's not a top-down approach. It's really from the bottom up.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. So to them, you would suggest that capitalism improves the environment, doesn't actually hinder it.
So I would say that capitalism has the capability to reduce emissions and improve the environment.
Awesome. No, that's great stuff, and I agree entirely. I just think, like you said, it's a consumer based process, and even when you look at the technologies, I'm thinking about my field of study, vehicles, where automotive technology, and it's amazing that you have these things like catalytic converters that now we've effectively eliminated hydrocarbons out of the atmosphere entirely, at least in America. And you look at kind of other like communist China, developing India. These places are not known to be the cleanest places on Earth, though they are developing. But at the same time, I wonder how. What's a better way to word this? What I guess technology are you guys looking at specifically? Like what? Because I mean, there's so many different ones. I remember there was the hydrogen fuel cell was a potential viable option. It seems to me nuclear is the one that people are talking about the most. What's your opinion? What's going to get us off of the hydrocarbons and the fossil fuels?
Yeah, so I think that it's really going to have to be an all of the above approach. And fossil fuels certainly are not going away overnight. We can't if we want to continue to power our country. Mm-hmm. It's not going to happen without some real work in the energy sector. Nuclear absolutely has to be a part of this approach. I think we get about 20% of our carbon-free electricity from nuclear power. Mm-hmm. And with more research and development, that number can keep going up. And nuclear can become safer and safer to deploy. I also think that battery storage is really going to be very instrumental in making renewables like wind and solar more marketable. Mm-hmm. Kind of a original complaint about sources like that is, okay, well, solar power is great, but what if it's cloudy outside? Or wind power is great, but if you have like a really still day where there's not a lot of wind? And the idea of battery storage is that you can store a surplus when it's really sunny or really windy, and that energy can be used at a later time instead of needing to use it right away, and that ends up wasting energy. So I think that nuclear and battery storage are going to be really instrumental in developing carbon-free, carbon-neutral energy technologies.
Yeah, no, I have thought the same exact thing myself. I do wonder though, specifically about like the solar cells and the windmills, the production that is required in developing these and installing these things everywhere. I mean, for windmills, you kind of have land cleared. For solar panels, like you said, you need like certain conditions and everything. And then with the limits on battery power that we have now, even though I'd say now it's probably better than it's ever been at any point in history. I mean, we all have these smartphones, and the batteries are fantastic in the beginning, and then slowly they start to decay for whatever reason. And I think there are companies like probably Tesla is probably heavily involved in this, and any electronics company I'm sure is heavily invested in this idea of how can we make a battery better. But what do you think, like in terms of the cost? Is that still an issue that you perceive it to be in the future? Like how do I say this? The fossil fuel costs for developing these things. Like obviously it's nice to have a windmill and a solar cell, but like it costs a lot of fuel to make these things and distribute these things. How do you see those things being mitigated?
Absolutely, that definitely is a concern that we see. The way that we look at it is that the transition that needs to happen, and obviously carbon emissions are not going to be, brought down to zero overnight. It's going to have to be a gradual process of, okay, we're transitioning to solar maybe in California a little bit more because it's so sunny. That's really going to be deployable there. Mm-hmm. It's not worth our money to put a ton of solar panels in Seattle because there's a lot of cloud cover. That's not going to be very successful. And that's why an all of the above approach is so important for driving down costs of energy. In Washington and Seattle area, hydropower is really successful because it's on the coast, and that's been really instrumental in driving down costs and creating energy that emits less carbon. So I think my answer to that question is really that it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, and it's not, okay, we're going to transition all the way to solar or all the way to wind. Mm-hmm. It's really going to have to be identifying ideal conditions for each energy source and going from there.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic because I mean, like you said, we're so dependent on fossil fuels right now, and that's not necessarily a bad thing because I mean it's improved our standard of living by measures we can't even comprehend. But I do like the idea of taking nuclear, for example, and like making that the source for like our electricity, which is a major one of the most major resources we use. When I think about kind of the like leaf blowers and lawn mowers and kind of like these small motor devices that we use, that kind of stuff, that even that it's going to take a little more time until we find something that's more effective. I mean, until we can get batteries and kind of electrical power to a point where they're more effective and I guess they perform better than the motor applications do. I don't see those things really going away overnight, like you say, and I think that it is going to be a phase out process. What do you say to people who are kind of more, I guess, hysterical about it, and they think that, oh, we gotta, they want to cut these things kind of off overnight. We should kind of just get rid of these things. What would you say to those people?
Yeah, I think that climate alarmism certainly has the discussion in a way. We definitely need to act now. Climate change is something that we need to prioritize, but we do have more than 12 years. And using rhetoric like that really has kind of pushed the conversation back because it alienates people. And we want this to be a hopeful discussion. We don't want people my age and younger thinking that, oh my gosh, there's not going to be a planet in 12 years. And that causes a lot of panic and anger and don't want this discussion to be divisive and alarmist. We want this to be a way to cooperate and a way to protect the planet for the future. And I don't think that needs to be a doom and gloom discussion. I think it can be more of a hopeful discussion.
Yeah, I agree entirely. And I think for people like me, I mean, we see that and we kind of see like more of the same, like more of like the hyperbolic politicization of science, which, then it makes someone who's prone to be skeptical to be very skeptical of that and to even kind of then say, you know what, forget it. Fossil fuels are fine. They're probably just lying about it, which, I don't agree with either. I think that the issue is it's a balance, I think, between, like pollutants actually in the air and kind of the gases themselves. But actually, there's an interesting question for you guys. Do you think that like carbon dioxide, methane, like, do you think that these are the problems? I guess I identify it as the EPA. I think they classify it as pollutants, if I'm not mistaken. What do you think the difference is between like hydrocarbons and like the actual soot, I guess you could say, like the actual like black soot you would see in the air from unburnt fuels, as opposed to gases like CO2 and methane? Do they have equal value in terms of harming the climate, or do they kind of is one worse than the other, or do they kind of have different consequences entirely, but still affect the planet negatively, in your opinion?
I think that ACC's focus has been largely carbon emissions and greenhouse gas emissions. That's kind of creating the greenhouse effect and increasing temperatures. So that's definitely been our priority. I would say that either is good for the environment. I don't want to say that I don't want to advocate for one over the other, but our focus has certainly been greenhouse gases.
Okay, awesome. Another big question that I always have when I talk to people about this issue is, we always talk about kind of climate change with respect to kind of what we're doing, like in terms of America. And I just wonder, like, let's say even if we were to achieve all these great goals that we want to do, let's say we could get on nuclear energy, we could get solar and wind to be kind of self-sustaining and, even profitable. I want it to be profitable so people will engage in it, invest in it, and people will use it. Because like you said, I mean, as markets work, essentially, markets will drive prices down as long as they're more efficient, and lower prices will attract more people. But how much of the responsibility in terms of like the world climate, how much of that is on America? I mean, even if we cleaned up everything we possibly could, doesn't China play a role in this? Doesn't India play a role in this? And if they're not on board with this stuff either, what are the odds that we can actually clean up the planet as much as we would like to?
Yes, So our American climate contract, which we introduced in April, is based on 4 pillars, one of them being global engagement. So we really believe that the United States needs to take a leading role on climate change because it is a global issue. So you're right, even if the U.S. Decreased all of our carbon emissions, which are about 15% of global greenhouse gas emissions, wouldn't fix the problem. So I think it's really important that the United States cooperate with allies and countries like China and India to export technologies, to talk about global approaches to climate change, because you're right, we can't solve it alone, and there has to be cooperation. But I also think it's really important to not kind of defer to pointing fingers at China and India and saying, well, you have to clean up your act. Well, we all have to clean up our acts. So it can't just be kind of a blame game and kind of putting responsibility on certain countries over others. We think that this is a great opportunity for the United States to be a leader. You know, this is a challenge that every country in the world is facing, and the United States has the means to lead in technological innovation, in research and development, and we think that it's our moral responsibility to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. Would you, I guess, what do you think I guess one of the concerns I have, though, is that I look at countries like a communist China, and you kind of look at the history of how we've had treaties with these guys in the past, and how they'll sign basically whatever and that looks good. You know, they're all about making themselves look very good. But I'm not confident that we'll be able to enforce something like that. Even if we can get people to sign to it, it's a piece of paper, and international contracts don't really hold up when, you know, everyone leaves the room and goes back home to do whatever they want to do. I guess what would be your suggestion? Do you have any measures beyond just signing a piece of paper that would ensure that countries would comply with these things?
Absolutely. Our focus is definitely not a treaty. So our focus is more, how can we develop technologies here in the United States and make them marketable so that we can export something like battery storage to China, which is working on deploying solar farms? How do we kind of equip other countries with tools to lower their carbon emissions? It's not so much of like a Paris Accords 2.0. It's like, here's an actionable item that can export that's good for our economy because it's an export, and is also good for the environment.
Oh, interesting. So you're taking the market-based approach and kind of applying it internationally.
Absolutely.
Oh, I like that. That's a fantastic idea. Excellent. So where do you think this issue stands today with like the American people in general? By my estimation, I do question whether people even care about this really anymore. When I was growing up, it was a major issue. It was talked about all the time, and you know, we were told. I remember, I think it was supposed to be in 2012. I mean, there were a lot of dire predictions about 2012, but I remember Al Gore was saying something like, "Oh, the world's going to end. It's going to be brimfire, you know, stone and fire falling from the sky or something like that." In like 2012, and obviously those predictions didn't come true. But how do I word this? I mean, do people care about it anymore? Is this a hot political issue? I feel like most people have kind of forgotten about it.
It's interesting. From ACC's perspective, young people are really, really engaged with this issue, and it's going to bring them to the ballot box in November and the ballot box in the future beyond November too. We actually did a youth poll in February of this year. We polled 18 to 35-year-old voters of various political affiliations and ideologies, whether that was Republican, right-leaning, left-leaning, independent, libertarian. And we found that 77% of right-leaning respondents said that climate change is important to them. 90% of independents agreed with that statement. And 90% of all the respondents agreed that the United States should invest in clean energy, modern infrastructure, and other natural ways to reduce emissions and address climate change. So for younger people in the United States, I think this is really a driving force to their political activism.
That's interesting. And I do, I always question too, like, people, if that's the case, let's assume that's all true. Um, People will say when asked, "Oh, the environment, yes, it's super important to me. We should do all these, this and that and the other thing." But then when you look at people's actual behavior and what they actually do and what they buy and how they, the resources they use, it kind of tells a different story. I think some of the most mindful people of the environment are probably some of the most, I guess you could say, wasteful, or just they like to use their energy. And so it's kind of like I look at that and I kind of view that as a contradiction in a sense. But again, I guess this kind of just thinking about it on the spot, this is why you guys are a market-based solution, because you understand like human nature, you understand human proclivity to lower prices and to things that work better than other things that make your life easier. So in that respect, your approach is spot on, I think. Going back, kind of just a step back to developing countries. We kind of talked about America's responsibility in the global world. What is your position for like developing countries, like African countries that kind of are in this transitional phase where I remember reading a while ago that the IPCC was suggesting that these guys should use like, wind power and solar power, which at the time, especially 10 years ago, were still not really effective. I mean, really, and I would say kind of poor at the time. What's your position for developing countries? Can they still use kind of fossil fuels heavily, or do you guys advocate that they also use kind of green energy resources?
I think it comes back to what I mentioned before, which is need to, here in the United States, develop technologies that will be marketable. Countries that are still developing and need kind of be a little support in going green, because it can be more expensive than just using fossil fuels. And those people deserve energy. They deserve a higher quality of life. Our climate platform, the American Climate Contract, really emphasizes that global engagement means not just making the world greener and promoting green technologies, but helping developing countries provide energy to their citizens, because there's still a shocking number of people worldwide who don't have access to ample electricity and energy. So that's really a problem for their quality of life, obviously, and that's something that needs to be addressed.
Excellent. Yeah, I think that was always one of the big issues for me, is that, and at the time, and I still kind of wonder if it's true today. I haven't really looked into solar panels and that kind of the prices of those things right now. But it's like, if you were going to say, and I think one of the representatives I remember reading about said it best, that if you're going to force kind of these developing countries to use solar and wind, you're essentially saying you can't have energy. And so I guess, so you would suggest that, so like right now, if gas is in these gas engines and kind of gas production is the cheaper way to provide a higher standard of living to people, you would let them use that up until like a point where a market can come in and say, hey, we have something better than your coal plant. We have something better than your internal combustion engine. These kinds of things. Is that correct, or you tell me?
I don't think that it's ACC's position that we should be stifling development for countries and preventing citizens from getting energy. Of course, we'd like that to be done, as clean as possible. But you're right. Like, when the market can come in, and frankly, that's on the United States and developed nations to really pursue research and development. These technologies really marketable, because everyone deserves access to electricity, and we want everyone to have access to clean electricity.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. No, that's great. That's fantastic. I think you guys have really found a nice middle ground in between both sides of both extremes, really, where really I can't find a reason why someone wouldn't want to join your organization. How can people get involved with you guys?
Absolutely. So we have a membership program. It's free for students. And then for young professionals and a general membership, there is a fee associated. But right now, due to COVID-19, all our membership programs are temporarily free of cost. Ooh. So if you go to acc.eco/membership, you can sign up for whatever membership tier kind of applies to you, and that gives you kind of exclusive access to ACC events, discounts on ACC merchandise like sweatshirts and things like that, and really just kind of like let you join this community of people who care about the environment but want to pursue solutions that won't destroy the economy, and will capitalize on the power of markets.
Awesome. What's it like working for the company? Like, what if someone signs up today? What's the next step? They sign up, they're all good to go. What does it look like to get involved for you guys?
Right now, due to COVID-19, a lot of our events are online. So we have like educational events with members of Congress, policy experts, state level officials, to talk about environmental issues, and kind of build members' toolboxes to say, to talk about environmental issues. We have various newsletters and things that get people involved. I work in communications, and I work with students often to write op-eds and engage on the issues themselves when they're still in school. So we're just really working to create a community of people who are ready to advocate for the issues they're passionate about.
Awesome. No, that sounds great. Have you guys had any opposition? Have you found that, like, whether it was like a political party or another, I don't know, some kind of advocacy group, have you find anyone's been kind of shouting out against you?
I really haven't. I think that we present really common sense solutions. Certainly there's people who don't want to address climate change at all. They don't think it's an issue, and of course maybe our message doesn't really appeal to them. And on the other side of the spectrum, there's kind of this argument of, you're not doing enough. Well, we have to start somewhere, and we have to work in the system that we have right now to reduce emissions. We can't. Green New Deal, first of all, is a non-binding resolution, but it doesn't. It's not going to happen overnight. We can do solutions now that are going to reduce emissions now. So, to me, that's kind of a common sense solution. That's not to say that everyone in the world agrees with us. I don't want to give off that impression, but I really think that we've built a broad coalition of supporters.
Awesome. What is your position on I guess, government subsidies? I think kind of, you're free market based, but at the same time, I think some of the things you've said kind of indicate to me that you're willing to kind of spend money to invest in like other countries and kind of invest in industry. Are you guys for like subsidizing private industries to help facilitate these things, or do you want it to be completely market based?
Are a limited government organization, but as it applies to subsidies, we really want to focus on the research and development aspect so that when technologies are deployed, they're so marketable that they don't need subsidies. And a lot of times we really harp on subsidies on solar and wind. The fossil fuel industry gets a lot of subsidies as well. So we don't believe in picking winners and losers in the market. We really believe that resource of energy should be able to compete, and once we get to that point, renewables are going to be competitive against fossil fuels.
Okay, so you don't want things to be subsidized. You want them to be kind of competing amongst the competition in the market, essentially.
Correct.
Okay, awesome. Are you guys in contact with any kind of leaders of industry? Like, do you have any like people do you know anyone or in contact with people in like the nuclear industry, in kind of the fossil fuel industry, in the solar industry, and these kinds of things?
We absolutely have external relationships and partnerships. As far as the industry goes, don't have kind of an example on hand to give you. We work with a lot of policy groups that advocate for nuclear and renewable industries, and that's kind of the avenue that we've pursued there. We also, on our 501c4 side, we work with legislators on issues. Definitely a pro-business, pro-company organization to foster innovation. Even fossil fuel companies now are pledging net zero emissions by 2050. We really want to emphasize that companies and industries are not the enemy here. It's really important that we build bridges and work together to reduce emissions.
Well, that's awesome, Carly. All this has been super informative, super great. It was awesome to have you on. Any final thoughts for the listeners? Anyone who might be interested or kind of maybe on the fence about stuff? Any lasting impression you'd want them to know walking away from this conversation?
I think it's just really important to note that no matter what you do for a living, no matter where you're from, no matter what you look like, we all share the planet. And it's really imperative that this is an issue that unites us and we move forward past the divisive politics that have kind of defined the issue for my lifetime and before my lifetime. And I think the time for finger pointing and for kind of partisan bickering is over. I think it's time for common sense solutions. And if that sounds good to you, joining ACC is the right move.
Awesome. Well, Carly, thank you so much for coming on. I greatly appreciate your time. Guys, go check them out. ACC, American Conservation Coalition. They're doing great work. And again, I mean, like we've been talking about, it doesn't matter where you are in the aisle. I think what we all agree that there needs to be solutions, and that's the one thing we agree on. We have a lot of common ground there. So let's invest in that, and let's see what the future holds. And I think if we're serious about it, we'll make a better tomorrow for future generations. And I love it all. I love it all. Carly, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
All right, till next time.